Thank you, Catherine. That was a very good opening remarks, and it sets the tone for our discussion today. I will focus very much on the underwater domain awareness after you having given a very good background. So the underwater domain awareness framework, I call it a comprehensive, structured, and inclusive approach to taking maritime governance aspect forward. And this is 10 years of our Honorable Prime Minister announcing the Sagar vision. So I think this is very timely, and I would also like to first acknowledge Professor Mimi's effort in bringing us together and her persistent connect with us. And we are very, very optimistic that we together will be able to add value, not just for Indo-Philippine relations, but for the entire region. And we have some very senior people who are going to be giving their views and guidance in taking this forward. The first and foremost I would like to flag is the tropical characteristics. I mean, we all operate in the tropical waters, but what we don't realize many times is that the underwater technology development that happened during the Cold War period was in the temperate and the polar region. And that has significant limitations when it is deployed in the tropical waters. So to give you a very simple figure is that the sonar performance, which is the only means to see below the water or to generate underwater domain awareness, suffers 60% degradation. Now, we all keep talking about the Indo-Pacific strategic space. The Indo-Pacific strategic space, by definition, is the tropical waters of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Both Philippines and India can play a very significant role in the entire Indo-Pacific strategic space. And but we need to recognize and acknowledge the tropical characteristics. And if we can build capacity and capability to counter the tropical challenges, I think nobody can stop us from playing a leadership role. Now, just to put in context, tropical waters, as I said, and the Indo-Pacific, and where Philippines is and where India is. So the geostrategic location itself means that this collaboration has a huge potential to contribute. And also that we need to work together towards capacity and capability building, or rather I would say acoustic capacity and capability building to further the underwater domain awareness. Now, let us see what are these specific challenges. I mean, warm versus cold water. So we have talked about the sonar performance, but it also talks about rich biodiversity. I mean, this place is blessed with rich biodiversity, but many times instead of we being able to take advantage of the undersea resources, both living and non-living, we have become a victim to it. And many times we also get waylaid by the extra-regional powers, and we really suffer in terms of not being able to strategically drive our own interests in the region. The dependence on technology also becomes a major factor. So indigenous capability building and partnerships to focus on capacity and capability building becomes a very, very important aspect. Now, for any strategic perspective, people, economy, nature, I mean, this is a very well-known triple bottom line. We need to focus on them, and our performance parameters have to be people, economy, nature. I mean, people has its own specific. I mean, my colleague Catherine has already emphasized on the coastal communities. Unless they, I mean, many times we find that the coastal communities are at the receiving end and they become the victim. Of course, there is a lot of economic opportunities, but have we been able to leverage them? And how do we kind of leverage the economic opportunities? And of course, the sustainability is a very, very important thing. So the nature part becomes very important. So how do we build all this together, or how do we stitch all this together? Now, maritime domain awareness has become a very, very important term, but many times I worry that the people driving it have not really been able to understand what it means and how. So my worry is that it has remained an event-driven, 9/11 in the global scenario and 26/11 in this part of the world. And what this has also done is that it has remained a security-driven formulation. And because of that, it has only remained on surface. So the conventional maritime domain awareness is largely on the surface, but the 90% of the opportunities, resources, and challenges lie below the surface. So underwater domain awareness needs to be given very special attention, and focus needs to be brought in there. So going forward, there are four stakeholders, as we are all aware. I'll just quickly talk about them. I mean, the security is very important. I mean, none of us needs to re-emphasize that. But this part of the world, I mean, Indian Ocean, even smaller nations like Myanmar, who are having a lot of political challenges, are also deploying submarines. So submarine safety also becomes a very big issue. But otherwise, maritime domain awareness becomes so much more important. Then political volatility. So we have a lot of incidents like the 2611, as I mentioned. The boat people is also very important. Then the blue economy, I mean, food security, energy security is increasingly being uh, looked at from the underwater space. So how do we regulate that? I mean, we all know fisheries is largely in the unorganized sector, and reports say that the fish stock is on the decline, but the bycatch is of the order of 80%. So how do we reconcile all these things? And deep ocean mission has become such an important area, but do we really have the capability to drive it in a more sustainable manner? Of course, environment and disaster management is such a big thing. We are increasingly seeing stranding of big whales, and plus the disaster management is such a thing. We have become victims multiple times, and there only the frequency has increased, but our preparedness doesn't seem to be to be able to match the requirement that it is. See, we are not here to say that we can stop a natural disaster, but with early warning, we can definitely minimize loss of life and property. And when we are looking at the maritime sector in a serious way, this can really come in the way of, I mean, when the World Economic Forum reports say that, it could be a very serious hazard going forward. Science and technology, I mean, the most important thing is to understand what this underwater ecosystem is all about, how the multiple components of the ecosystem interact with each other, how then only we'll be able to navigate a sustainable development mode. But the most important thing is, how do we get technology into it? How do we, if you just look at India, India's exclusive economic zone is going to be of the order of 3.7 million square kilometers. Can we put so many sensors? I don't think so. So how do we get smart technology, AI, and data analytics? My colleague Sridhar will be covering a lot of it, how we have found some ways in between these challenges that I mentioned. So this is the framework that we have built, and we have a copyright also of this. The four sides of the cube represent the four stakeholders that we discussed. But the core will be the acoustic capacity and capability building. If the technology that we're importing from the West is suffering 60%, I don't think it can solve our problem. So if we can enhance this deterioration to some extent, like to give you a number, a particular sonar that I'm aware of suffers from 32 nautical miles, the detection range comes to about 6 nautical miles. If I can make that 6 to 12 strategically and deny that to my adversary, from a security perspective, we have a 4-time advantage over our adversary. But at the same time, the same capability can also help the other stakeholders. So in a global south, developing world that we are all in, such savings will be an extremely great strategic advantage. So we need to focus on that. If you look at the vertical construct, sensing, analysis, and regulation, the bottom-up approach is very important. But typically today, what we are doing is having a top-down approach. We not only import the technology and the know-how from outside, even the regulatory framework we import from outside, which does not work in our water, and it creates a lot of mess. So how do we kind of build a bottom-up approach where we do a lot of data collection, understand our local site-specific conditions, and then kind of look. And this is a very structured approach, as you can see. Different components or different stakeholders within, or even for countries to collaborate, this is, I think, can be a very, very important framework. And it is inclusive because it also addresses the communities. So my colleague Shlok will also talk a little bit about what we have been doing for the communities. And we will be having a very focused discussion. Our team recently went to the Maharashtra and the Gujarat coast and got some very insightful inputs from them. And they have, the coastal community has given a lot of positive feedback to our work and the relevance of it. Uh, we can divide that into smaller parts like underwater radiated noise from ships. It helps the military in terms of stealth. It also helps the conservation people in terms of regulators, in terms of acoustic habitat degradation. And of course, that suppliers of ships, I mean, the designers and the shipbuilders can take a lot of inputs from us and reduce the underwater noise because of shipping. And this can cause a lot of sustainable advantage in this part of the world. Similarly, for sediment management also, the connectivity is largely kind of disrupted because of the siltation. That is a very unique characteristic of this part of the world or the tropical waters. So different stakeholders can come together and kind of take advantage of this. So, I mean, as I said, the tropical waters are very different, but modeling and simulation is something which we need to look at, because for AI and ML, a lot of data is required, which is not available. So my colleague Sridhar will discuss how we have kind of found a way forward in this. And I think these are some of the unique solutions globally, which our team has been able to put forward. So typically you require to see, to understand, and to share. To see are the sensors and the platforms. The platforms could be autonomous underwater vehicles or surface platforms. So these are hardware, which I would say a developing country can still try and import. But going forward, once the data is collected, it needs to be analyzed. And that is the data analytics part, which I think should not be done, or the data should not be handed over to our adversary or to anybody outside. And that should be done indigenously, and we should focus on developing this capability. This will be discussed more. But the third is most important: to share. Now, when we say to share, different users will have different requirement. If it's a policymaker, he has a different requirement of the inputs for his work. But if it is a fisherman, his requirement, or people on the ground, their requirement is different. They need different displays. So how do we customize it? Then only it makes sense. Today, the whole thing, to see, to understand, and to share, comes as a full package, where we don't have any flexibility to break it down and make it more customized to the user requirement. The second aspect is even more important. I mean, we have worked on this 100 coastal warrior thing, but to implement this, the human resource has to be of three types. One is the high-end data analysts who will do the algorithm, the hardware, and the whole kind of the back-end infrastructure. But once the data is extracted, or the information is extracted, domain knowledge specialists will have to interpret this. I mean, this will require, I have not listed the other discipline. I mean, it is not just technology part, but also international relations students, political science students. They need to make sense of this input. And the most important for me is the field deployment specialists. These are the coastal community people who, with a little bit of skilling and little bit of support, can be a big asset in terms of managing the waterfront. So this will become the most inclusive part, where we can integrate them into the thing, and the traditional knowledge will come very handy here. I mean, this whole South Asia or Asia, the coastal communities have very unique capabilities, traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge, which can be put into this larger digital transformation that we are trying to build. So this coastal warrior proposal is something we have built, where we can come together and kind of take this forward. I'll not spend too much time here. This is the marine spatial planning that we have done. My colleague Sridhar will explain this more, so I will just skip that. But I just want to highlight that using non-underwater data or aerospace, like the satellite data and data from the other sources, we have built an underwater picture. So that's very important, and we are trying to build this across various applications. So I think that's the end of my presentation. Catherine, back to you. Thank you so much.